Something happened after the Australian Grand Prix that could change the entire 2026 Formula One season. Mercedes didn't just win the first race. They dominated it. Pole position, fastest race pace, and a perfect 1-2 finish with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. But only hours after the race ended in Melbourne, rival teams started analyzing the data. Acceleration traces, energy deployment patterns, hybrid system behavior. And what they found has now triggered serious concern inside the paddock. Some engineers believe the Mercedes power unit may have shown an advantage of nearly 30 horsepower compared to certain rivals. Others believe the real secret may be hidden in how Mercedes deploys electrical energy under the brand new 2026 regulations. Which is exactly why teams have reportedly started pushing the FIA to take a much closer look at the Mercedes system. Because if the data from Australia is correct, the W17 might not just be the fastest car on the grid. It might be exploiting something hidden inside the new rules. Ferrari drivers already admitted they were nowhere near the Mercedes pace in Melbourne. Red Bull finished more than 50 seconds behind the winner in the very first race of the season. And now the entire paddock is asking the same question. Did Mercedes simply build the best car for the new era? Or did they discover something inside the regulations that the rest of Formula One completely missed? Because if the FIA investigation expands after the evidence revealed in Australia, the first race of the 2026 season may have already started the biggest technical battle of the entire championship. The 2026 Formula One season officially began in Melbourne. After months of testing, speculation, and preparation, the entire grid finally arrived at Albert Park for the first real battle of the new era. New regulations had changed almost everything. New power units, more electrical energy, less traditional combustion power. For the teams, this season represents a complete reset. Nobody truly knew who had interpreted the rules correctly. Testing had provided some clues, but testing is never the full picture in Formula One. Fuel loads are hidden. Engine modes are limited. Teams often disguise their real performance. The Australian Grand Prix is where the truth finally begins to appear. And almost immediately, Mercedes started attracting attention. From the first practice sessions, the W17 looked extremely comfortable on track. George Russell appeared calm behind the wheel. The car looked stable through the fast direction changes of Albert Park. Under braking, the Mercedes remained balanced. But the most impressive detail appeared when the car exited slow corners. The traction looked incredibly clean. Other drivers were fighting wheel spin. The Mercedes simply launched forward. At first, rival teams assumed Mercedes might be running a lighter fuel load during practice. That is common in Formula One. But that explanation quickly started to disappear during the final practice session. Russell produced a lap that immediately caught the attention of engineers across the paddock. More than 0.6 faster than the closest Ferrari. In modern Formula One, a difference like that during practice is already significant. But the real moment of truth arrived the next day, March 7th, qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. This is the moment when teams finally unleash everything. Maximum engine power. Maximum hybrid deployment. Everything the car can deliver in a single lap. And when Russell pushed the Mercedes to the limit, the W17 suddenly looked even stronger. The car rotated beautifully through the corners. The balance looked perfect. And the traction out of the final sector was exceptional. Then the timing screens confirmed what many engineers were already starting to suspect. Pole position for George Russell. 1 minute 18 seconds and 518 thousandths. But the next result made the message even clearer. Second place, Kimi Antonelli. Another Mercedes. The entire front row belonged to the same team. And what made Antonelli's result even more impressive was what had happened only hours earlier. During the final practice session, the young Italian had crashed heavily exiting turn 2. The rear of the Mercedes stepped out violently. The car hit the barriers hard. For a moment, it looked like his weekend might be over. But the mechanics worked quickly and rebuilt the car before qualifying began. Antonelli returned to the track and delivered a remarkable lap that secured second place on the grid. Inside the paddock, that front row lockout immediately raised questions. Ferrari had expected to fight for pole. Red Bull had hoped to be closer. But the gap to the Mercedes was larger than many people anticipated. Charles Leclerc later admitted something very direct after qualifying. Ferrari was simply nowhere near the pace of the Mercedes in Melbourne. And according to him, the advantage appeared to come mainly from the engine performance. Statements like that are extremely rare in Formula One. Drivers rarely admit such a clear performance gap publicly. But the numbers from qualifying made the situation impossible to ignore. Still, qualifying pace is only one part of the story. Because in Formula One, the real test of any car comes on Sunday. race conditions, fuel loads, tire management, energy deployment across long stints. And when the lights finally went out for the Australian Grand Prix, the race began to reveal just how strong the Mercedes package truly was. When the lights finally went out in Melbourne, the race immediately took an unexpected turn. Both Mercedes drivers had locked out the front row in qualifying. Everything looked perfectly prepared for them to control the race from the beginning. But the start did not go according to plan. George Russell reacted a fraction too slowly. Kimi Antonelli struggled even more with traction. And that small hesitation was enough for Ferrari to attack. Charles Leclerc launched brilliantly from the grid. By the time the cars reached the first corner, the Ferrari was already ahead. For a moment, it looked like the entire race might shift in Ferrari's direction. Russell suddenly found himself in a difficult position. Leclerc ahead, Lewis Hamilton closing in behind. The Mercedes driver was trapped between the two Ferraris. And the opening laps quickly turned into a tense fight for control of the race. Under the new 2026 regulations, overtaking works very differently than before. The hybrid systems now deliver power in aggressive bursts. Drivers can activate a special overtake mode that releases additional electrical energy. But every time that extra deployment is used, the battery drains faster. Which means every attack leaves the driver vulnerable a few seconds later. Russell experienced that immediately. Each time he activated the attack mode to challenge Leclerc, the Mercedes surged forward with impressive acceleration. But seconds later, when the battery level dropped, Leclerc could respond. Overtake. Counterattack. Another attempt. For several laps, the lead of the Australian Grand Prix changed hands repeatedly. It was intense, close racing. Exactly what Formula One hoped to see under the new regulations. But then the moment arrived that quietly changed the entire race. A Red Bull suffered a mechanical failure and stopped on track. Race control immediately deployed the virtual safety car. At first, it seemed like a minor interruption. But inside the Mercedes garage, the reaction was instant. Both Russell and Antonelli were called into the pits at the same time. A perfectly executed double pit stop. Fresh tires. Minimal time lost under the neutralized conditions. Ferrari made a different decision. They stayed out on track. Their strategy was based on probability. Albert Park often produces multiple safety cars during a race weekend. They believed another interruption would likely appear later in the Grand Prix. But that decision carried a major risk. And within seconds, the entire race order changed. Russell rejoined the circuit with something every Formula One driver dreams about. Clean air. No traffic ahead. No Ferrari blocking his pace. Just open track. And that is when the true performance of the Mercedes W17 began to appear. Lap after lap, Russell began controlling the race from the front. Not pushing aggressively. Not taking unnecessary risks. Simply managing the gap behind him. Which is often the clearest sign of a dominant car. Because when a driver can control the pace without driving on the limit, it means the performance advantage is real. Meanwhile, Kimi Antonelli had his own race unfolding behind him. After the poor start, the young Italian had dropped to 7th place. But slowly, lap after lap, he began climbing back through the field. And during those overtakes, one particular detail started appearing again and again. Every time the Mercedes exited a slow corner, it accelerated slightly earlier than the cars around it. Not dramatically faster, but consistently faster. Corner after corner. Lap after lap. By the middle phase of the race, Antonelli had already returned to the podium positions. And from that moment forward, the result looked inevitable. George Russell crossed the finish line in first place. Kimi Antonelli followed him home in second. A perfect 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the opening race of the 2026 season. On the surface, it looked like the ideal start to the new era. But behind the scenes, another story was beginning to unfold. Because once the race ended, engineers from several teams began studying the telemetry from Melbourne. Acceleration traces, energy deployment patterns, hybrid system behavior. And what they discovered in that data would soon create serious tension across the entire Formula One paddock. But the real story of the Australian Grand Prix did not unfold during the race. It began after the race was over. When the cars returned to the garages. When the engineers opened their laptops. When the data from the race started being analyzed in detail. Because in modern Formula One, every team studies enormous amounts of telemetry after each Grand Prix. Throttle inputs, energy deployment curves, battery discharge rates, acceleration patterns. Thousands of data points from every single lap. And when engineers across the paddock began comparing those numbers from Melbourne, something unusual appeared in the Mercedes data. Not one strange moment. A pattern. Every time the W17 exited a slow corner, the car accelerated slightly earlier than its rivals. Not dramatically faster, but consistently faster. Corner after corner, lap after lap. That kind of consistency immediately caught the attention of rival engineers. Because the 2026 regulations have completely changed how Formula One power units work. Less traditional combustion power. Much more reliance on electrical energy deployment. That means the timing of that electrical power has become incredibly important. Release the energy too early, and the battery drains quickly. Release it too late, and the driver loses crucial acceleration when leaving corners. Most teams are still learning how to balance that system. But Mercedes looked completely comfortable with it from the very first race of the season. And that is exactly why questions began spreading through the paddock. Some engineers believe Mercedes may have discovered a smarter way to control the hybrid deployment system. Not necessarily more power, but better timing, better efficiency. Power delivered exactly when the driver needs it most. Albert Park exposed that advantage perfectly. Short acceleration zones, frequent traction points, rapid transitions between braking and throttle. Under those conditions, the Mercedes looked incredibly efficient. Some analysts inside the paddock now believe the Mercedes power unit may have an advantage close to 30 horsepower compared to certain rivals. 30 horsepower in Formula One is a massive difference. That kind of advantage changes everything. Acceleration, overtaking, tire management. It even affects how aggressively a driver can push during a race. But here is where the situation becomes more complicated. Because several teams believe the advantage may not come purely from engine power. Instead, they suspect something deeper inside the way the hybrid system interacts with the combustion engine.